Language and identity. So if language and culture are intertwined, so is language and identity. We said that language is the crucible for culture, and the terms in a language reflect that people group's culture. We also say that language is the primary identity or the primary marker of identity. Okay, that's why we have what we call ethno-linguistics. Ethno-linguistics is the study of language and identity. Okay, ethno-linguistics is the study of language and identity. So we have the word ethno and we have linguistics. So language is the ethno-linguistics is the study of language and ethnic identity, but it also encompasses other sources of identity. Okay, so language, where what a person speaks, shows that he belongs to this particular people group. Even even all the markers in a language, the accent and pronunciation, the words that they use, the the grammar that the person uses, all the aspects of language, they serve to mark out the person. Okay, that includes ethnicity and social and economic status. So rich people and poor people talk differently. There's even a marker for a particular person who belongs to this region and that region. Okay, I'm very sure that you would identify Visayans the way they speak Tagalog. You would know that they are Visayans. Okay, so it's a mark of identity. Even the way English is spoken. In fact, the CIA has a method for identifying a person's identity, national identity, by studying the accent and the speech markers of that person. Okay, so ethnicity is easily seen through language. Of course, there are other marks of ethnicity, not just language. For example, Visayans are fond of arroz lacobana. They're fond of this kind of food. People from Bicol, you would say that they're fond of spicy food. Uh, People from Bicol are said to be very generous, given the generous quality of their soil. That's why they were called ibalon, because uh, when somebody leaves, they would say, ibalon mo, bring this with you. So there are other markers of ethnicity, but language is the primary marker of identity, ethnicity, and social and economic status. Rich people talk differently from poor people. That's why we have this picture of Chris Aquino when I was quite young, and Chris Aquino was just starting out as an actress. One of the first roles that she took was that of a poor lady. And in that particular video, it's actually a TV episode. She spoke as though she was a rich person. So she was portraying a poor woman, but movie critics said it didn't seem to fit her role, because even though she was even though she was portraying a poor woman, she spoke like a rich person. So So we can know that a person is rich or poor depending on the way they talk. Now, of course, there are people who are pretentious. Okay, and when they do that, they when people know that they are not that rich, but they talk like that, they people would think of them as being pretentious. Okay, and maybe politicians would act like that. They are very rich, but during election period they would talk like ordinary people, like even like poor people, to get the sympathy of poor people, to make poor people think they are one of them. Okay, so that happens, but it's seen as being pretentious. Okay, so language is the primary marker of identity. Now, Howard Giles came up with what is called the accommodation theory. According to him, people adjust their speech depending on whether they want to identify or distinguish themselves from their interlocutors. So, for example, in the video that you have, there's this Scotsman who wants to be identified with Englishmen. In the UK, there are people who are English, Scots, Irish. And when a person wants to be identified, when a Scotsman wants to identify as being English, he would remove his speech markers, the way he talks. I'm sure you've heard in the course of your internet surfing, you have encountered examples of people who speak English differently, including the Scots. Okay. Now, if a Scot would like to distinguish himself from other English people, he would highlight his speech markers, including his accent, the way he talks, his pronunciation, the grammar that he uses, the words that he uses. Okay, he adjusts them. That's why we have what we call convergence and divergence. Convergence is when a person wishes to be one with his or her interlocutors. Interlocutors, by the way, means the people that person is talking with. And so a speaker would remove distinguishing marks from his or her speech, and instead he would make his speech look like that of sound like that of the people he or she is with. On the other hand, we have divergence. Divergence is when a person when a person changes his or her speech in order to distinguish himself or herself from the people that he or she is with. That's divergence. So convergence and divergence. Okay, so I wonder if you have any questions as of now. Okay, thank you very much. The idea of language identity. The idea of identity through language gives rise to purism and prescriptivism. So, one motivation why people want to keep their language pure is for their identity, to maintain their identity. Okay? Actually, class, I have a certain amount of language purism. I don't want Tagalog to change very much. I don't want Tagalog words to be replaced by other words like the word himagsikan. I'm sure In your, you remember our discussion on the word himagsikan, that it expresses a different kind of thinking apart from revolution. The word bayan also uh, signifies something different from nation. Okay, so I have a certain amount of purism in me, and such purism comes from the idea that language is our identity. And when we lose our identity through when we lose the distinction of language, then we also lose our identity. So if our language is full of English terms, then our identity is somewhat diluted, nagiging malabnaw yung identity natin kasi puro English. Okay? But of course, I realize you cannot really prevent language change all that much. It also a desire for language identity, to keep one's identity through language. Also, it's also a motivation for prescriptivism. So prescriptivism is when a person insists on the use of this, of that, on a particular usage. Okay. Now, prescriptivism also works the opposite way. Prescriptivism also works the opposite way. For example, in centuries past, there were many academicians who wanted English to sound like Latin. And one of the ways they try to do that is to try to have two subjects in English. An English sentence has only one subject, but Latin can have two subjects. So what English some academicians would do is they would try to prescribe the use of two subjects in one sentence, like the term "it is I." You know, ordinary English speech doesn't use "it is I." Natural native speakers use "it's me," and they don't say "it is me." They say "it's me." But there are some prescriptivists who want to identify with Latin much closer. So they would prescribe the use of "it is I." It is I. So that's one way of trying to make English sound Latin or Greek. Another way is to encourage English writers to write long sentences. Again, by writing long sentences, prescriptivists encourage English to sound like Latin. You see, at that time, Latin was the language of the intelligentsia. Okay, it's the language of the academe. It was highly intellectual compared to English. English was not considered intellectual at that time, but people wanted English to sound intellectual by making it sound more like Latin. So the idea is that English becomes intellectual, and the people speaking it are also intellectual. So the idea is that English is not just a language for the unlearned, but it's the language of the learned. So by prescribing, uh, prescriptivists try to make English sound intellectual, and the users of that language also intellectual. Okay, in the Philippines, for example, those who could speak Spanish are given an attribute, are attributed, are ascribed a higher status than other people. Okay, people who are able to speak Spanish fluently are ascribed more prestige than other people because Spanish was language of the colonialists, of the old landed gentry, the landlords, Panginoong may lupa, uh, the colonists, the ones who were at the top of society. And even during the American period, they were still at the top of society. And many of them are actually at the top rung of socioeconomic status here in the Philippines. So they're accorded a higher status if you could speak Spanish. Okay. In other places, those who could whistle, talking by whistling, there's that phenomenon where because it's a tonal language, uh, some people are said to be able to communicate with other people up to 10 kilometers because they can whistle their language. They can whistle their language. So when they whistle their language, because it's tonal, they're able to talk with people even far away. And according to some people, even up to 10 kilometers away, they could talk with such people. So uh, the identity is ascribed to such people because they could speak that language. Okay. Now, another example is the Basque region. The Basque region would like to keep their language as their heritage. Okay. They want to keep their language as a form of heritage. They want, actually, many people in the Basque region want to separate from Spain. And one of the ways they try to separate from Spain is to produce an education system that is separate from Spain based on language. So the the emphasis is on the language. By maintaining a separate language, they end up uh, strengthening the idea of separation from Spain. That's why the Basque region has this Ikastola, Ikastola education system based on language. Okay, so language can be a heritage marker. Okay, for example, for the Scots and for the Irish, their old language. For the Irish, it's Gaelic. For the Scots, it's Gil. I can't pronounce it. Sorry, but for the Irish, even though they don't speak Gaelic, which is the traditional language of uh, of the Irish, even though they don't speak Gaelic anymore, they have shifted to English. They still consider Gaelic as their heritage language. So, according to the Irishman I spoke with, Gaelic will never disappear because it's given a special status. Although he told me there are only 20,000 people who could speak Gaelic in Ireland. Uh, so even if they shifted, even if the Irish shifted to English as their language, they still look to Gaelic as the language that uh, serves as their identifier. So language has become a heritage for them. So the poems, the songs, the stories that were in Gaelic, they are preserved because it's a way of maintaining somebody's heritage. When you don't have a heritage, you're like uh, you're like a hollow person. Okay, we all need to maintain our heritage. Now, the Scots and The Irish, one of the ways they maintain their heritage is their language. So even though Gaelic and the language of the Scots are not spoken by many people in Scotland and Ireland, they're still used as the marker for identity. Compare that with Old English. Nobody nobody identifies with Old English as their identity. They don't consider it. Nobody in America or the UK identify with Old English as their marker of identity. But Gaelic, which is also old, is still viewed as the marker of identity. Okay, so in other words, language can serve as a heritage, and your heritage can be maintained through language. We also have language standardization. The idea of language standardization is to give a prescribed use for language. This is the standard language. When that happens, it's usually for the purpose of maintaining a national identity. Again, language standardization is intended for maintaining a national identity. Okay, so Filipino, for example, is a way of maintaining national unity in the Philippines. So you have your first language, you have your trade language, the language of wider communication, the regional language, and then you have the national language. So speaking in the national language produces the idea that you have a national identity. Okay? So when you use a national language, it produces the idea that there is a national identity. Okay, so language can be a form of identity. Okay. Oh, I forgot to mention, class, that one of the ways to produce language purism and prescriptivism is to produce dictionaries. So Samuel Johnson produced a dictionary because he wanted people to have an awareness that there are pure words, there are pure uses of words. Okay, so dictionary could be used. A dictionary could be used to emphasize language identity. In the case of Noah Webster in the United States, because he wanted America to have a separate brand of English from that of use in the UK, he produced an American dictionary of the English language. So the idea there is this is the English of America. Okay, the dictionary serves as a guide as to which are the words and even the pronunciation and spelling. The words, pronunciation, and spelling of a party of those words served as a way of producing a separate identity. Another way, another way to produce purism and prescriptivism is the use of what we call language academies. Sorry. Language academies have the legal authority to say what should be used and what should not be used. How a word should be spelled, pronounced, the standard grammar, the standard spelling. All these are produced by what we call language academies, and they're intended to help maintain a particular identity through language. So we say that language can be used for identity, it can be used for prestige, and it could also be used for heritage. Okay, so let me stop sharing and let me stop recording